Night was restless in Susa. A king lay awake while the lamps smoked and the moon hid. When he finally called for the Book of Chronicles, the clerk's dry voice found a page that spoke of a small, old debt. The report of a gatekeeper who warned of assassins and saved the king's life. The name in the margin was simple: Mordecai. There was a pause, a rustle of parchment, and then the king's question: what honor had been given for that? None, came the answer. Nothing at all. By morning, a man already stood in the court, hoping to be first in the king's ear. Haman, son of Hammedatha, had slept well. He had eaten with the queen yesterday. He would eat with her again today. And between those two feasts, he intended to finish a problem named Mordecai. A carpenter raised a tall frame in Haman's courtyard at dawn, a device as blunt as Mordecai's silence when told to bow. Haman pictured the man hanging there as a caution to the city. This is how you deal with stubbornness. The king called him in. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman smiled, consulting the mirror he kept inside his skull. Who else could it be? He asked for royal robes the king had worn, a horse the king had mounted, and a prince to lead a public parade through the square, crying that this is the king's pleasure. The king nodded as if every word had already been decided, and said, "Good. Hurry. Take the robes and the horse and do exactly as you have said for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the gate. Leave nothing out." The sentence landed like cold water. Haman's lips moved once without sound. But orders are louder than pride. He fetched the robe, bridled the horse, found Mordecai at his post, and dressed the man he meant to kill. He held the stirrup. He led the animal by the bridle past bakers and scribes, past boys with slings and women buying oil, and he said the words he had written for himself: "Thus shall it be done for the man the king delights to honor." Hooves rang against stone, while Haman's shoes filled with dust. When it ended, Mordecai went back to the gate. Haman went home with a face no one in his house had seen before. His wife, Zeresh, heard the story and looked at the floor. His friends did not laugh. "If Mordecai is of the people they call Jews," they said, "you will fall before him." A servant knocked, borrowed Haman's arm in a courtly way, and led him to the second feast. Esther waited with a calm that had taken 3 days to build. The king raised his cup and asked her again what she wished. He had promised half the kingdom once. He would promise it twice. Esther did not ask for land or jewels. She asked for her life and the lives of her people. "We have been sold," she said, "to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, I would have kept silent, for our distress would not balance the king's loss." The king set his cup down. "Who is he, and where is he, who has dared to do this?" Esther turned her eyes and did not raise her voice. "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Haman felt the floor tilt. The king rose, walked into the garden, and breathed the night air as if oxygen had become scarce indoors. The tamarisk trees stood patient while a man counted the cost of his negligence. Inside, Haman fell at the couch where Esther reclined. The courage that fed on other people's fear had left him. He begged. He reached out and forgot how things look when a king walks back into a room. The king stepped through the doorway and saw supplication and closeness and chose a single word for both. "Will he even assault the queen in my own house?" The sentence became law without ink. A eunuch named Harbona, who had a memory for names and a habit of watching comings and goings, spoke softly into the heat of that moment. "Behold, the gallows that Haman made for Mordecai stands at his house, 50 cubits high. The king did not need more. Hang him on it." Men who live by orders moved. They covered Haman's head. They walked him out through corridors he had paced like a proprietor. Courtiers stepped aside and studied the floor. In the street, news ran ahead of feet. By the time they reached the courtyard, neighbors had peered over walls and closed shutters without slamming them. The carpentry from dawn stood ready. There was no speech worth giving. A man who planned an erasure met the sentence he had measured for someone else. The device did its single job, and the courtyard exhaled. Back in the hall, the king's anger cooled into decisions. He gave Haman's house to Esther. Esther set Mordecai over it, and the man who once sat by the gate stood before the throne, wearing a signet ring that had marked death warrants 2 days earlier. The decree against the Jews could not be revoked. Law written in that kingdom was iron, but the king signed a second word that let Esther's people defend themselves. Messengers rode out on fresh horses, carrying the new order to the far provinces, where fear had already prepared a feast for wolves. In Susa, Mordecai left the palace in blue and white, with a gold crown and a cloak of fine linen. People leaned from windows to see the man who once would not bend. Joy moved like a tide down alleys that had tasted silence. In the provinces, the Jews gathered, not to riot, but to stand. The day that had been chosen for their ruin turned, and those who had plotted in secret met resistance in daylight. It was not a clean day, but children lived who would not have lived, and the memory of their names was lengthened. Zeresh counted what had vanished. Servants carried tables into the yard, unsure whether to hide them or burn them. The gallows cast a narrow shadow across late afternoon. Someone would take it down tomorrow. No one wanted the lumber. A quiet man from the gate walked the road that evening without guards and looked up once at the sky as if measuring a distance. He had no triumph in his face, only the knowledge that steady refusal is a kind of courage. Esther did not sleep. She sent food to the poor and wrote letters to distant friends. She asked that the days be remembered, people trading gifts and setting out light. She did not write Haman's name in those letters. The story would carry it without her help. She wrote instead of reversals, a sealed plan broken, a parade that went the wrong way, a rope that refused the hand that knotted it. She wrote about choosing silence and then choosing speech, and how both choices cost something. A clerk closed the ledger on that season of orders and counter-orders, and the palace learned again how to walk. The king returned to his habits. Mordecai returned to his work and tried to stay smaller than the clothes the court put on him. Harbona passed the courtyard and noticed the empty sky. In the city, a mother lit a lamp for a feast she had not expected to see. In a far village, a boy asked his grandfather why people eat sweets on that particular day, and the old man answered without polishing the tale. Once, a man built a high gallows for a neighbor. By evening, he was not around to admire it. The empire forgot quickly, but households remembered. They held the memory at the level of food and light, at the level of children's games, at the level of stories told on nights when storms made the shutters tap. The quiet hero at the gate remained quiet. The queen grew older and put away the silk she had worn in crisis. A rope rotted somewhere. The Book of Chronicles gained a new entry that sounded like 10 lines of dry fact. Behind those lines stood a day when justice did not need poetry. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.